Some equations are simple, like for instance, big titties plus video games equals gives me a boner. Some equations are a little more complex, like for instance, this plus this might equal this. Or maybe this minus this equals this guy from Mad Max. Now this video is not about our political perspective. It's simply trying to ask the question that all gamers really want to know. If the world comes to an end, can we expect it to look like Fallout 4? Well, in order to properly test this theory, we'll need to answer a few questions to see whether or not this post-apocalyptic world is possible, let alone probable. We'll need to see if synths could actually exist given the level of technology we as human beings are capable of. We'll need to find out whether humans could survive a global nuclear event. We'll need to see if nuclear radiation would in fact alter the appearance and chemistry of animals that survived the initial blast. Furthermore, we'll have to theorize whether freezing yourself in a deep freeze and waking up 200 years later is possible. And finally, what are the chances people will just start throwing nukes at one another? So let's get to average baiting, baby! Now, could synth technology actually exist? Now, technology has come a long way over the past century, with automobiles taking over the world, people landing on the moon, and Snapchat filters that make your penis look like a puppy dog. But the real question is whether or not those technological improvements are indicators of humans having the ability to not only make robots that have human-like features, but whether we could actually make robots that could pass for human beings. Now think of the possibilities. Robots that could pass as human beings? That's a sex toy that everybody could enjoy. Most people would never interact with real people ever again. I know I wouldn't. I'd be dry humping robot vagina 24/8. My life would be fucking over. Now it's hard to say if it's even possible though, because our current technology hasn't gotten there just yet. So at best, all we have are theories and conjecture based on where we are at the moment. However, when it comes to technology, it's hard to imagine where it can go until it actually goes there. Look at where we are now, and imagine telling someone in the 1800s about some of the shit that we do nowadays. Most of the things would be things they couldn't even have dreamed of. What type of sorcery is this? Dude, it's a light bulb. If you think that's fucked up, hold on to your nipples, cause things are gonna get way more intense for you. However, our current robotic technology is nothing short of amazing. Japan is doing some funky things when it comes to androids, there's just no arguing that. They've made some crazy things that would make grown-ass people piss all over their panties. For instance, in 2014, at a showing at the National Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation in Tokyo, 3 human-like androids were showing off their human-like design to the point where it was difficult to tell the difference between human and robot just by looking at them. These robots are the creation of Japanese robotics expert Hiroshi Ishiguro. What the hell is the lizard from Mario doing making robots? That's a good guess. Now that's a close guess, but Hiroshi is actually a professor at Okasaka University Department of Systems Innovation, and he's been developing robots for over 20 years. Now what's really creepy about the robots Hiroshi designed are people can actually interact with them and have face-to-face conversations. Better yet, these robots are pretty literate and they don't end every conversation with, "I'll be back," and then start killing people. So that's a plus. Even though you can interact with these robots, the people at the museum won't actually let you fuck them or touch them with your genitals, no matter how much you ask or beg them, or so I'm told. It's not like I asked or tried to robonap one of them or anything weird like that. Now these robots are still a long ways off in comparison to the ones we see in Fallout 4, which are indistinguishable from human beings. But fuck, they are getting closer by the year. This was in 2014, so by now, it's quite possible they'll actually let you fuck them. Fingers crossed. The androids in Fallout have a very high level of artificial intelligence, which is very similar to the androids in the movie Blade Runner or the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. This level of intelligence has an unsettling effect on their human counterparts, really making individuals question what it means to be human, focusing in on tough philosophical questions like the soul, life, death, and human experience. Leaving it ever up for debate, could robots really be experiencing life the way we do with this level of intelligence? Now the movie Blade Runner, the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and even the railroad all attempt to deal with such a concept and start to look at androids with a more humane perspective. Now this concept is a lot to live up to in current robotics, considering right now, even with all the advancements in robot technology being showcased in Japan, after interacting with a robot, a person still knows they were talking to a fucking robot. Also, we've yet to duplicate real human skin to the touch and artificial intelligence to the point of self-awareness. Now some say that we have, but again, that's another philosophical debate. Now, this is one of the most plausible things to consider when considering if fallout could actually happen in real life, as this technology has been envisioned in movies, books, and is something that appears to be within reach. Will it ever get to the level of the synths in Fallout 4? Well, it's really tough to say, but I would say that it is very likely that some form of android technology will exist in the not so distant future. Now, most of us who've played any of the games in the Fallout series know that Fallout is the aftermath of a global nuclear war. So if we want to realistically look at the world of Fallout and apply it to a real life scenario, we have to ask ourselves, could humans actually survive a global nuclear event? Now, this may be the easiest question to answer, but the toughest to prove without blowing up the world. There is a lot of research on the concept of a nuclear war and the aftermath that it would have on us, the inhabitants of planet Earth, after the dust has settled. There is also a ton of propaganda associated with nuclear weapons that leads people to believe that the use of them means the absolute destruction of not just humans, but life on Earth as we know it. So in fact, if we look past the propaganda, scientists theorize that it is actually possible for humans to survive a global nuclear war. And not just survive for a couple weeks and then die off afterwards due to lack of food or oxygen, but actually start to rebuild a social structure like they do in Fallout and other post-apocalyptic stories. Now, there are a lot of theories surrounding the idea of a nuclear holocaust, including but not limited to nuclear winter, economic collapse, societal breakdown, widespread sickness, and the list goes on. The basic point here is if someone starts dropping the big boys on people, things are gonna get all fucked up in a hurry. Now, to an extent, that is true, but that extent, again, is up for debate. Now, the idea of total extinction from nukes really comes from theories regarding nuclear winter. This is the story everyone was told as a kid, that if enough nukes were shot off at one time, they would block out the sun and everything would fucking die, right? Which is terrifying and actually made me piss all over myself just now. Right just this second. This idea of nuclear winter was conceptualized and modeled in 1983, but has since been revised by numerous new theories. Now, the original theory basically stated that with enough nukes launched, the dirt, soot, and smoke from the explosions would get stuck up in the atmosphere, letting very little sunlight through, which in turn would cool the earth, kill all the plants, and kick the ever-loving fuck out of your favorite testicle. Now, the original theory did think the world would get cold as fuck, like for a really long period of time after all the shit had hit the fan. However, new theories think the world would cool, some animals and plants would die for sure, but we'd be alright at the end of a couple of weeks. These are the type of scientists that really have a skill of putting a positive spin on a negative situation. I think that these people would be great Little League coaches, wouldn't they? You imagine? Hey Billy, yeah, I know you haven't scored a goal all year and you kinda suck at the game, to be honest. And that dodgy right eye of yours makes all the other kids want to keep their distance, but give it 16 years, get some plastic surgery, move to a new city, and you never know, you might make a friend. Hang in there, buddy. Most recent studies state that the Earth would cool possibly by 12 to 20 degrees Celsius, meaning you'll have to wear a sweater rather than a t-shirt and short shorts. Not so bad, right? Also, the radiated aftermath will only be life-threatening for a couple of weeks. So if you're in an exposed radiation area, as long as you were in a filtered fallout shelter, there's a good chance you'd be able to emerge again in a couple of weeks. Now, this isn't to say nukes are okay or anything, but they may not be the global killer we once thought them to be. Now, in all fairness, guys and girls, I'm not a nuclear physicist, nor do I have any such degree, so I would not consider myself an expert on this matter. I'm only going by what I was able to conjure up on the internet, and we all know how reliable the internet is. Either way, we can be certain that firing off a bunch of nukes isn't good for the environment or the people, animals, or plants that occupy it. Now, will it kill everyone? Scientists that know a lot more than me think that it will not kill everyone, at least right away. It may collapse our social structures or kill us over centuries, but there would be a post-Fallout civilization of some sort.
Okay, great, that's a lot of conjecture and shit, but what the fuck does it have to do with anything?
Well, settle down, let me tell you guys, okay? People assume that after a nuke goes off, that area will be irradiated for years, making it uninhabitable. And that radiation will spread all over the world, making it also uninhabitable. Because even with nuclear explosions being as big as they are, we're not all gonna be sitting in major cities holding hands in a big circle when the bombs go off, killing everyone via explosion. So that means the real fear comes from the aftermath of these weapons and not the explosions themselves. And if nuclear winter doesn't kill us, then it must be the radiation, right? Well, not exactly. Now basically when a nuke goes off, it causes a big old mushroom cloud. And we all know what that looks like from the photos, right? And the thumbnail to this fucking video. Well, that mushroom cloud picks up thousands of tons of earth from the crater of the large explosion and pulverizes them into trillions of particles. Now these particles are then contaminated by radioactive atoms produced by the nuclear explosion. The mushroom cloud then carries these particles from miles above the earth, and we know whatever goes up eventually must come down. So eventually these radioactive particles then fall out of the cloud, dispersing the radioactive particles, thus becoming fallout. Now each contaminated particle continually gives off invisible radiation, much like a tiny X-ray machine, while it's in the mushroom cloud, while it's descending, and after it has fallen to the earth. A lot like I give off sexual vibes when I'm at the bar and attractive girls are looking my way. Now the descending radioactive particles are carried by the winds like the sand and dust particles of a miles thick sandstorm. The particles are all different shapes and sizes. Now the largest and heaviest ones reach the ground first in a location close to the initial explosion. The smaller particles are carried by the winds for tens of thousands of miles before falling to the earth. Now radiation decays rapidly at first and then slows over time. After the first 2 days of a nuclear explosion, it decays the most rapidly. After about 2 weeks, the occupants of most fallout shelters could safely stop using them, meaning the air and the environment would be clean enough to inhabit yet again. Furthermore, radiation can't penetrate through any object and is significantly reduced as it goes through surfaces. So after about 2 days, the radiation isn't strong enough to penetrate most surfaces, meaning fruits and soils to plant new fruits would be fine after about 2 weeks. So in short, the world would be affected greatly in the first 2 weeks of areas that fall inside the blast radius as well as the fallout radius. However, the danger wouldn't last long enough to extinct the entire human race. So that doesn't mean it's okay to have a global nuclear war. So Trump, if you're watching this, go ahead and take your fingers off that big red button. Now, given that the environment in the game still has very irradiated zones caused by the war, aka the glowing sea, this would be very unlikely considering over 200 years has passed since the war and all of the radiation would have dissipated. However, the idea that people have survived the nuclear fallout and are continuing to live their lives in some way or another is very plausible, even though we actually have far larger nukes than the ones they used in Fallout. Which moves us on to our next question. Could radiation actually alter the physical makeup of animals, causing them to become mutated hybrids of those species? Now, just a quick note, we're not dealing with the idea of super mutants in this video because they come from the forced evolutionary virus, which is a human invention in Fallout's lore, and not the byproduct of radiation. So our focus is on the animals themselves, like giant scorpions, Brahmin, etc. Now, could radiation really cause these animals to take an evolutionary turn and become something so monstrous over time? Now, as we know from the previous point, radiation decays really quickly after a nuclear event, so deformation in animals and plants would have to happen pretty quickly and then be passed on to future generations. Basically, mutation is about as likely as that weird guy who sniffs his fingers all the time reproducing. Oh, it smells just like my ass. You wanna fuck me? You wanna do this? As that event would have to happen really fast, and chances are, it was by accident.
Oh, what did I do? I'm never gonna be able to shower this off of me!
When researchers looked at Chernobyl for the effects of radiation on the wildlife there, they found that long term it really had no effect on their physical appearance. Now, for those of you who don't know what Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic that malfunctioned and had a nuclear meltdown, which is very similar to the effects of that of a nuclear bomb. This was a devastating event that caused the evacuation of thousands, the direct deaths of 31 people, and the indirect deaths of many more. Although this was a horrific event that left Chernobyl in ruins ever since, scientists have learned a lot about nuclear radiation and its effects on wildlife and the environment based on this event. Now, there was a time when most of the animals from Chernobyl had dangerously high doses of radiation in their body, but they still appeared to look normal on the outside, leading scientists to believe that even with fatal doses of radiation, an evolutionary shotgun response is very unlikely. However, right after the meltdown at Chernobyl, scientists did examine the wildlife at the time when the radiation was at its highest, and they found many deformities, even some that would be considered right out of a movie like glowing fish, strange growth on animals, and Miley Cyrus. This information is compelling evidence that during extremely high doses of radiation, there is a physical response in nature. However, it may not be an evolutionary one, meaning the deformities may not actually help the animals to better survive the conditions like some of the creatures we see in Fallout, most notably the ghouls, who evolved to survive the high doses of radiation. These mutations seem more like isolated events that wouldn't likely be passed on genetically through their species, nor affect multiple animals in the same way. However, it is difficult to say what exactly would happen if the world experienced a global nuclear event and so many species were affected all at one time. It may in fact be possible that animals may keep their new characteristics and start to pass them on as a form of overclocked evolution. But that may be a stretch of the imagination though, as there is really no evidence to support this theory. And my science teacher would have likely spanked me on my ass just for suggesting it. And yes, my science teacher was a spanker. This is just one of those theories that seems to go hand in hand with nuclear myths, but it's one that's very difficult to prove. At this point, it seems very unlikely that animals would become deformed even after a global nuclear event. So if we did live in a post-apocalyptic world, it would be likely filled with the same primal threats as the ones most people have faced since the start of mankind. Yeah, but what about cryosleep baiters? Could people actually go to sleep and wake up 200 years in the future without aging a day, like the protagonist in Fallout 4? Well, that's a great question, random person who I just made up and pretended to be. Let's answer that one as well. Science fiction has always posed the idea of cryosleep, most notably in space travel. People learned a long time ago that if we're going to travel super far distances on a space shuttle, then we'd have to find an efficient way to survive the trip. Now, people need too much nourishment when they're awake to survive for thousands of years on a spaceship, so the logical conclusion is to sleep the whole way there. Well, it seems like the most speculative sort of science fiction may become working reality in the next 30 years or so. According to a NASA-funded study, keeping astronauts unconscious almost halves the haul of any given trip. No shit, NASA! I think that's some pretty safe math there. So wait, if he doesn't eat anything, we're gonna need to bring less food? Is that what you're telling me? Okay, now we're cooking with gas here, folks. Right now, an Atlanta-based SpaceWorks enterprise is working with NASA to come up with this very concept. They believe they can use torpor, or short-term hibernation, to suspend humans for up to 2 weeks on a space shuttle. Now, one crew member will stay awake while the others sleep, and then another will wake up and alternate, and this process will repeat over the duration of the trip. I don't know about you guys, but if I were the only one awake, everybody sleeping would have my balls on their head at one point or another. Fun fact, and it's probably why I'll never be an astronaut. So how does it work, you must be asking your brains right now? Well, simply put, it's like an induced hypothermic state to slow down the metabolic rate and then use some anesthetic to put you out for a long period of time. This is a process that is already being used in modern medicine to slow down the rate of certain disorders, giving doctors more time to work with organ transplant recipients or to find a solution to a certain disorder. But knocking somebody out and making them need less in terms of food doesn't exactly make them age any slower, or better yet, halt the aging process altogether. Now, there's not a ton of research done on the effects of aging and temperature, especially when it comes to actual human beings. However, there has been some correlations between other animals, including mice, that may indicate a relationship between temperature and longevity. Simply put, if we were able to cool our bodies enough without in turn killing ourselves, it may be possible to prolong life as well as possibly halt the aging process altogether. However, the current technology that we have right now is nowhere near at that level. And even from my limited understanding of biology, the only cells that wouldn't age would have to have almost no heat at all, which would in turn kill those cells. Meaning if you were frozen like a lollipop, it's unlikely you'd ever fucking wake up, let alone wake up 200 years later. I'm not saying this is impossible, but it is definitely improbable, which is likely to cause some debate in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about being frozen in time. It would appear that hibernation is within reach, but slowing down your aging is an unlikely concept as of right now, meaning the sole survivor in the real-life version of Fallout would have either died of old age or would have been killed during the freezing process itself. Which leaves us to the last and most important question of all. Would people actually start throwing nukes at one another? Human history is filled with bad decisions. It seems that people are destined to make mistakes just to be aware that they've made them. And when it comes to war, this really seems to hit home the most. The quote by the sole survivor really sums it up in a nutshell. War never changes. And if history has told us anything, he's right. It doesn't. It just becomes larger and larger, affecting larger portions of the world's population. Currently, there are 9 countries that have nuclear warheads. The 2 most notable threats to the world are Russia and the United States. These are the 2 big dicks in the shower for sure. Everybody knows you don't fuck with either one of them or you'll end up with a big gaping asshole, showing off their thick military might with stockpiles of the most dangerous weapons on the planet. Better yet, the United States is now in the hands of a man who will go apeshit on Twitter at 3 a.m. So it's possible that we're one Twitter troll away from global nuclear war. There's always the debate that even if the world went to war again, would they use their nukes? I would like to hope they wouldn't, but chances are they would. People are not known for making smart decisions, especially during crisis or war situations. So if you backed one of those 9 countries into a corner, then there goes the fucking neighborhood. There's also the fear that others may use their nukes, so this may prompt a preemptive nuclear assault, especially if the United States and Russia were on opposing sides in any given conflict. I would love to think that people would never resort to global annihilation during the downfall of a given nation. But if history tells us anything, there's nothing more dangerous than a drowning man, let alone a country filled with them. As long as there are nukes in the world, I think there's always the threat and possibility that someone somewhere will start using them. So in conclusion, I would theorize that the world of Fallout is very possible. Maybe not to the extent of the game when it comes to cryosleep and mutated enemies, but in terms of robots that want to kill us, or a world torn apart by nuclear war, the possibilities are definitely there. Now I hope it never comes to that, but if it does, at least I know to stay out of the glowing sea. Thanks again for watching, guys and girls. Hope you enjoyed this theoretical take on the world of Fallout and whether we could expect to live like settlers in the Commonwealth anytime soon. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, be sure to smack the subscribe button with your bum cheeks and come back for more fun next time. Stay tuned as we'll be coming out with a new top 10 very shortly for all you Fallout modders out there. Hope to see you all again next time and keep on average baiting, baby!